The Puppy Place, Shadow, Chapter 7. Then Lizzie heard it, a tiny, distant bark, and a whimper. Shadow didn't like this place. It was dark and lonely. He had come in to keep the little boy safe, but then the door had slammed shut and they were both stuck inside. "Shadow!" she cried. "Did you hear that, Charles?" Charles nodded. "I think it came from the beans room," he said, looking confused. They all ran back upstairs and into the beans room. "Shadow!" Lizzie called. Another bark. It was coming from the closet. Dad yanked open the door and Mom swooped in to pick up the bean. "Oh, honey," she said, hugging him. Shadow bounced out, looking as happy as always. Lizzie bent down to pick him up and give him a kiss. She was so relieved to see him, and the bean, of course. Yay! Shadow was glad they had finally hurt him. Maybe it was time for that treat? He had certainly earned one. "Ball!" said the bean, pointing back toward the closet. Dad shook his head. "He must have woken up from his nap and gone in there to get his ball," he said. Shadow followed him, the door closed, and then they were both trapped. "Good thing the bean has his guardian angel with him," Mom said, hugging the bean again. "I'm glad you're both okay." The next morning at school, Lizzie still felt horrible about what had happened. How long had Bean and Shadow been trapped? Fostering puppies was a serious job. But then something happened that made her forget everything else. "Remember I mentioned yesterday that we were going to meet a very special pet?" said Mrs. Abson right after math. "Well, our guest is here. Maria, would you introduce him?" Blushing, Maria got up, went to the door, and opened it. "This is Simba," she said as a big, stocky, yellow Labrador retriever walked into the room. The dog was wearing a harness with a leather handle. Holding the harness was a woman who looked like a grown-up version of Maria. "And this is my mom," Maria added. "She's blind." For a second, the classroom was completely quiet. Then it exploded into noise as everyone started asking questions at once. "How old is he? Can we pat him? How does he know which way to go?" Lizzie was probably the only one in class who wasn't shouting out questions. She just sat there, staring at Simba and at Maria's mother. Lizzie felt her face flush red as she remembered how she had acted the day before, showing off how much she knew about blind people. Of course Maria knew more than she did. When Maria went back to her seat, Lizzie gave her a special smile, hoping she would understand how sorry she felt. Maria smiled back. Mrs. Abson called for everyone to quiet down. "One question at a time," she said. She asked Maria's mom if she'd like to sit down and told her how to find the chair she had set up at the front of the classroom. When Mrs. Santiago was sitting, with Simba lying quietly next to her, Mrs. Abson called on Noah. "Where did you get Simba?" asked Noah. "I got him from a foundation that trains guide dogs for the blind," said Mrs. Santiago. "He spent the first year of his life with puppy raisers. Those are families who volunteer to bring up future guide dogs and teach them basic manners. Then the foundation trained him to work with a blind person. Then they trained me how to work with a dog." She smiled. "Finally, Simba and I were matched up and we graduated together." Next, Mrs. Abson called on Daniel. "Does he live in the house with you?" Daniel asked. "Oh, yes," said Mrs. Santiago. "He's with me all the time. But he's more than a pet. He's a working dog. And to answer another question I heard before, you should not pet a guide dog when he's working. It can distract him." She leaned down to pat Simba. But he gets plenty of affection, and if he's not working, and if you ask first, a guide dog's owner might give you permission to pat him. Mrs. Santiago told them all kinds of interesting things about working with a guide dog. Like, she said that Simba did not necessarily know which way to go until she told him. So it was up to her to know when to turn right or left. But Simba did know how to help her cross the street safely. If he sees danger, he won't let me cross, even if I have given the signal to go, she said. What if you want to go to a restaurant? Caroline asked, without even raising her hand. Can he go with you? Mrs. Santiago nodded. It's the law. Guide dogs can go anywhere. Simba goes to the post office with me, to stores, to the bank, and to restaurants. He knows how to behave no matter where he is. She smiled down at her dog. Right, Simba. Simba's tail thumped on the floor. Lizzie loved every minute of Mrs. Santiago's visit. She learned more about guide dogs than she had ever known before, and she even got to try out walking with Simba, holding on to his harness. At lunchtime, Lizzie asked Maria to sit with her. Simba is amazing, she said. I know, Maria said. He makes life so much easier for my mom. He's a real hero. That was when Lizzie had the best idea ever.